Welcome to this week's moonLight of Emuna, Parshas Tetzaveh, Parshas Zachor, coming up to Purim. This week's learning should be a schus for Refuah Shlema, Shalom Tzacham Bashifra, Nosan Feitel Ben Yehudis, Yud Menachem Ben Recham Paramal Kaleh, Shmuel Shen Zanvi Chevachava, Menachem Mordechai Ben Afir, Lil Nishmas, Chana Mashbas, Menachem Mendel, Ratzbas, Menachem Mendel, Henya Bas Chil Mechel. So we have Parshas Tetzaveh, and we're coming into Purim, and we also have Parshas Zachor. So we're going to try to learn a lesson combining the three. So we know, let's start with Parshas Tetzaveh. Parshas Tetzaveh, we know, mostly deals with the big day kuna, the clothing that the Kohanim wore when they did the avodah, when they did their work in the Beis Hamikdash. And towards the beginning of the parsha, in Perek Chav Ches Pasuk Beis, it says, "V'asisa big day kodesh la'aron achicha l'chavei l'seferes." Hashem is telling Moshe Rabbeinu, you should make big day kodesh, holy clothing, la'aron achicha, for your brother Aaron, l'chavei l'seferes, for glory and for a splendor. That's the idea of the big day of the big day kahuna, that it's supposed to be a glory and a splendor. Now the question is, who's it a glory and a splendor for? So the standard answer that a lot of Mefarshim give is for Aaron and his sons. The Kohanim should be treated with respect. The Ramban offers something like this, that it should be like that they have malchus, like royalty. But I want to read you a little bit from the Minchas, from the Sefer HaChinuch. From the Sefer HaChinuch. He explains the mitzvah like this. He says, Mishar Shem mitzvah. The roots of this mitzvah is hayisarek kavulanu ki adam nifal lepi pulasai, that a person is impacted according to his actions. And after his thoughts and his intentions. I'll skip a line. He says, therefore it's fit that the Kohen should wear these special clothing, so that when he looks at any part of his body, he'll immediately remember and be reminded and be awakened in his heart who he's serving. He says that, so the idea is that the Kohen, the clothing that he wears will remind him of who he is and what he's doing and who he's working for. And he says, this is like tefillin. This is like the tefillin. We're told to put on part of our body. For those who are doing daf yomi, we just spent a lot of time on the head, on the arm, right? So that a person should have the right thoughts. Even though the kohen would also wear tefillin, but because he was also doing a greater avodah, right? So every Jew needs tefillin because it's supposed to remind us. It's supposed to remind us that we're serving Hashem. When we daven, right, we wear shachris. When we're davening shachris, remember who we are and what we're doing and who we're talking to. But a Kohen who's serving in the Beis Hamikdash the whole day, he needs even a greater reminder, and therefore he wears these special clothing. So according to what the Sefer HaChinuch is telling us, that the lechavod l'seferes that we said here in the pasuk, that the point is, it's not for the glory and the honor of Aaron and his sons, for the Kohanim, but it's for the glory of Hashem, that by wearing these clothes they'll remember Hashem and they'll remember to glorify Hashem. So we could say in common parlance, they say the clothes make the man. So we don't believe in that, which we'll see from this Dvar Torah today. But we don't believe that the clothes make the man. But the clothes can definitely remind a person, right? When we go someplace where we have to make a good impression, we get dressed up. Because it reminds us of what we're doing here, right? You wouldn't show up if somebody was on trial for a very serious crime and their life is in the balance. They wouldn't show up in sweatpants, right? They would wear a suit. They would wear a tie. They want to make a more respectable, if a person's going to plead his case before a king, before a president, before an officer, he would get dressed up. It reminds him, it keeps him focused on his mission. He makes that impression, but it's also to remind himself. So that's the splendor and the glory here, is to remind ourselves how important it is. When we wear tefillin, how important what we're doing is here. When the Kohanim would wear the big day kuna, how important their job is, that they're serving the master of the world. Now, when we come to Purim, we see a lot of references to clothing. Most notably, which connects very directly, I didn't have to work very hard to make a connection between Purim and Parshat Tetzaveh, is in the beginning of the Megillah, in Perek Aleph Pasuk Dalet, it says, "B'haroisei oisha kvoid malchusai," that at Achashverosh's party he displayed the riches of his glorious kingdom, "V'es yikar teferes gedulasai," and the splendor of his excellent majesty, gedulasai yamim rabim shmoina mas yom, right, 180 days. Now, on the words there, Teferes Gedulasai, right? We just said in Parshat Tetzaveh we said L'chavod L'Seferes, but for the big day kuna, and here by Achashverosh showed off Teferes Gedulasai, the splendor of his majesty. So what does the Gemara tell us? The Gemara Megillah on Daf Yud Beis tells us Amar Rabbi Yosi bar Chanina Malamed Shalabash Bigdei Kahuna. This teaches us that Achashverosh was wearing the Bigdei Kahuna. Ksiv Hacha, because it says here in the Megillah, Yikar Tferes Gedulasai, right? The majesty of his greatness. Ksiv Hasam, and it says in Parshas Tetzaveh-Zachor-Purim l'Seferes. So you see this word Teferes shows up both places. So the Gemara learns from there that Achashverosh was wearing the Bigdei Kahuna. So the question is, why was he dafka wearing the Bigdei Kahuna, and why does the Gemara make a point of telling us this? So we'll come back to it in a second. But we see other places where it talks about clothing also in the Megillah, right? If we go to Perek Dalid, the first pasuk in Perek Dalid, pasuk Aleph, after the Haman and Achashverosh make their terrible bargain, it says, Mordechai yodas kol asher nasa. Mordechai knew everything that was done. By Yikra Mordechai's begodav, he tore his clothing, again clothing. By Yilbash sak ve'efer, and he put on sackcloth. Then we go to the first pasuk in Perek Hey, one Perek later. It says, Esther is getting prepared to go into Achashverosh to plead for her life and the life of her people. So it says, she went after she fasted for 3 days. Tilbash Esther Malchus, she put on her royal clothing. And she goes into the king. The pasuk again tells us, why do we need to know exactly what she was wearing, right? It seems a little funny. But the Megillah makes a point of saying that she put on her royal clothing. Then in Perek Vav, we're hitting pretty much every Perek, when Achashverosh has his dream and he wakes up and he asks his servants who's in the courtyard because he wants to honor Mordechai. He wants to pay back Mordechai for saving his life from Bigsan and Seresh. He calls Haman in and he says, what should I do to somebody who I want to honor, right? And what does Haman say? This is Perek Vav, Pasuk Ches. Well, actually, let's go back to Pasuk Zayin. Vayomer Haman el Hamelech Ish asher Hamelech chofetz bikare, the person that the king wants to honor, Yaviu levush malchus. He should bring him the royal clothing. Asher lovash by Hamelech, the king wears, and he should ride him on the horse. Right? We know the story. And then finally, after Haman is hung and Esther tells the king who Mordechai is, and Mordechai gets elevated to a position of prominence. This is in Perches Pasuk Tezvav. Mordechai yotzel of Melech. Mordechai leaves from the presence of the king. Bilvush Malchus, again in royal garments. Tcheles v'chur v'terezav, right, in turquoise and white and gold. The terezav g'dola, a large gold crown. V'tachris butz, a robe of fine linen. Vargamon and purple. Right, and the pasuk tells us all of the clothing that Mordechai is wearing. So what's the idea of why do we have so much clothing? And besides the fact that we know that on Purim, part of the way we celebrate Purim today is we put on costumes and masks. What's the idea? Clothing seems to be very, very, very important to us. So we explained, according to the Sefer HaChinuch, and others say something similar, that the purpose of the clothing, when a Jew's attitude towards clothing is clothing is supposed to have an impact, remind me, right? We just, also for those learning Daf Yomi, we just learned about tefillin, which we mentioned, but we also learned about tzitzis, and the tzitzis, we just had the story in today's Daf, how tzitzis saved the person from doing terrible averas. But what we had the Gemara that talked about the 7 mitzvahs that will save a person, right? The 2 tefillin, the 4 corners of the tzitzis, and the mezuzah. But the things that these are things to remind us of our purpose, of our mission, of our job in life. But how were Haman and Achashverosh interacting with this clothing? What was the purpose of Achashverosh putting on the Bigdei Kahuna, making this whole scene, showing off, right? The whole beginning of the Megillah talks about him showing off the splendor of his majesty. So the Gemara Megillah, daf earlier than what we said before, daf Yud Aleph, the Gemara here says on the word Hamelech that Achashverosh was one who ruled, right? Amar Rav Shemalach me'atzmai. Right, that he ruled on his own. Some said this as a praise, and some said this as a disgrace. The ones who said it as a praise, that there was nobody who was more fit to be the king than he was. But what about the people who said it negative? He didn't deserve to be the king. He wasn't right to be the king. But he was very wealthy, and he spent a lot of money to take over the throne, to buy the kingship. According to that second opinion, that Achashverosh really didn't deserve to be the king. He was an imposter, but he was very wealthy imposter, so he was able to raise himself to those levels. So what was the point of him showing everything off? Because we know when people are not confident in themselves, when people feel like they're not deserving, so they put on a good show, right? They cover they compensate for things that they don't have. So according to that opinion in the Gemara, that's what Achashverosh is doing over here. He's putting on the the big day kahuna, which is supposed to represent, we said the opinion of the Ramban that it's supposed to represent that he's like a king. So Achashverosh is trying to cover. He's showing that he has so much power. He's even like the Kohen Gadol, right? He's trying to compensate for that. And that's Haman's motivation when he asks Achashverosh, when Achashverosh tells him, how do I honor somebody I want to honor? And Haman thinks it's himself. He specifically, the first thing he mentions is the royal garments, right? He wants to pretend, because clothing, even though it could be used in a holy way to inspire us to remember what we have to live up to, but a lot of times it could be misused. People want to draw attention to themselves. They want people to give them honor that they don't deserve, right? This is what Haman and Achashverosh are doing. They both wanted more than they deserved, right? We see Haman throughout the whole Megillah. He's somebody who's so busy. The whole world is bowing down to him, but one person's not bowing down to him, and he can't handle it, right? He needs that. He's constantly pursuing that honor. People should respect him, whether he deserves it or not. So Haman and Achashverosh are the ultimate masqueraders. They're pretending to be something they're not. And the problem is, and we don't have time to quote all the Gemaras, but the Gemara says that was part of the problem why Klal Yisrael deserved to be punished, because they attended this party. They bought into it. They bought into Achashverosh's display of grandeur. They forgot what was really important, and they bought into this display of grandeur. Oh, Achashverosh is so chashav. They went to his party. They bowed down to Haman. They bought into the masquerade. They forgot what was real. They forgot to look for the real glory and splendor of the Kohanim, of Tefillin, of tzitzis, and they bought into Achashverosh and Haman's charade. They forgot that the purpose of the Kohen wearing Big Day Kahuna was to give glory and splendor to Hashem, to our job in this world to serve Hashem. And that's why when Mordechai hears the news that Achashverosh and Haman made this deal, which he really understands to mean that Hashem was upset with the Jewish people, Mordechai, what's the first thing he does? He rips his clothing and he puts on sackcloth. Not just as a tshuva, that's something that people do for tshuva, but as also he wanted to remind the Jewish people that you lost sight of the purpose of clothing. Don't get caught up in the superficiality. Don't, it's not what you see is what you get. You have to look for what's really going on here. What's the truth that's underneath all the clothing? When does Esther, we quoted the first pasuk in Parakeh, when does Esther put on the big day Malchus? Only after she fasted for 3 days. Only after she worked on herself. She got in touch, she fasted, she did tshuva, she davened to Hashem. Then she goes to approach the king's room there to ask, to beg for a people. Then she puts on, as we quoted right at the beginning of Parakeh, it was the third day after she fasted. Vatilbash Esther Malchus. Then she puts on royal clothing, because now she had as the Gemara tells us on Daf Yudalit in Megillah, that she had Ruach HaKodesh at this point. Now her insides match her outsides. Now I could put on royal clothing because I'll use them for the right purpose. She had to remind herself, I'm a daughter, I'm a child of Hashem. I'm here to serve Hashem. I don't know why I was put in this palace, Esther thinks. I don't know why I'm here, but I know that I'm here to serve Hashem. Hashem wants me here to serve him. So Esther now, after she gets back in touch, or she gets in touch, she reinvigorates her true neshama, now she puts on royal clothing, because now it could be used properly. Till then, Mordechai, they're ripping their clothing, they're wearing sackcloth. Once they do tshuva, they could put on the royal clothing. And that's why only after Haman is killed and after the new letters are sent out and the decree is annulled, then we had the pasuk that we quoted also. This was in I don't see which parak it was in. It was in parak Ches, pasuk Tezvav, and it's one of the psukim that we read out loud. We're proclaiming it. Mordechai yotzam ilfnei hamelech. Mordechai goes out in front of the king, bilvush malchus, in royal garments, tchelis v'chur v'teres. Right? Everybody in the shul reads that aloud. Everybody reads it aloud, because this is the point of it. Mordechai re-centered the Jewish people. To understand the purpose of clothing is a way of inspiring and reminding us of what we're supposed to be about. We're supposed to serve Hashem, not to get caught up in the external trappings. It's not just a declaration that everything was turned around for Klal Yisrael, but it's Mordechai representing the true model of how a Jew wears the clothing. When you're in touch with remembering who you are, being humble and modest, not showing off, then you could wear royal clothing to remember that you're a child of Hashem. That's what Chazal wanted us to all call out this pasuk at the end of the Megillah, to show if I have the right, if I have the Mordechai, if I'm in touch with the Mordechai in me, then I wear royal clothing because I'm Hashem's child. Just like the Kohen working in the Beis Hamikdash, or just like when I put on tefillin to daven Shachris. And that's why we wear costumes on Purim, right? To remind ourselves that it's all costumes. A whole year we're wearing costumes, right? We have to forget about what people look like on the outside. We have to forget about stop projecting some image that we want to project to the world and get back to the core of who we are. To serve Hashem. We're here to serve Hashem, to love Hashem, to form a relationship with Hashem. And that's the whole message of Parshat Tetzaveh, the Big Day Kahuna. It's not like the clothing that kings in the outside world wear, or that people wear fancy things because they want to show off, like Achashverosh and Haman. But rather, the clothing here is like it's like Esther putting on the royal clothing, like Mordechai putting on the royal clothing, to remind us of like the Kohen, like Aaron HaKohen putting on the royal clothing, like us putting on tefillin. Tefillin is also called Tiferes, right? Pe'er, it's called Pe'er, but it comes from the same language. And that's the point of Parashat Zachor as well, which I don't have time to get into. But Amalek's whole purpose, Amalek is look only at the superficial. Don't dig deep. Karcha, we don't have time to go into it today, but we've spoken about it in past years. Amalek is all about cooling things off. Don't worry about, you don't matter. Everything is superficial. That's the whole point of Amalek. That's who Haman was from. So this week we go into Tetzaveh with Zachor, and the command about Amalek is to remember what they did to us. I mean, they tried to make us focus on the superficiality. And we have a commandment to remember that. That's the message of Parshat Tetzaveh, with all the Big Day Kuna. The whole parsha goes through all the details of the Big Day Kuna, and remembering Amalek, and going into Purim with the focus on clothing and masquerades is all to remind us of this. That yes, of course, we use clothing in a positive way. We use clothing. We have a uniform. We put on tefillin. We put on tzitzis. The Kohanim wore their special clothing. But all this is to remind us what really matters. This is all to remind us of our purpose and our mission, and with that, I wish you all a beautiful, wonderful Shabbos and a freilich and lichtig in Purim, and to remember to remember the mitzvah of remembering Amalek, which is a mitzvah say, maybe the only Kriyas HaTorah that is a mitzvah say. I wish you all a beautiful Shabbos.